Hello and welcome back to the Devine Witch. I'm your host, Debbie, and today is going to be a little bit different. Over the course of the last 3 weeks, I've been interviewing different members within our pagan community. And last week I had Meg, the week before that I had Brian, and the week before that I had Heidi and Roger. If you haven't checked those out, go ahead, give them a look through, and then come back and learn a little bit about me, because that's what today's podcast is about. Learning about the witch behind the Devine Witch. I've been wanting to do this for a while because I know now that we got this podcast on different streaming services, it makes it hard for you guys to really know who I am. And I'm still trying to figure out my voice when it comes to these podcasts because it's a little bit different than, doing a YouTube video or a video in general, because all you have with yourself is your voice, and you don't want to sound too monotone. You don't want to sound too, doing this or that, and then your mind just trails on. And trust me, I'm my own worst critic when it comes to it. But one of the things that I wanted to do today is kind of let you guys know a little bit about myself, especially if you've never seen the Devine Witch, you've never heard of me, you've never seen any of the content that I've made, any of our blogs or anything like that, or you're just not from the Ohio area. So I wanted to take today to kind of show you who I am, how my path started, and some of the things about me that you may not know. And as this podcast grows and I continue to do interviews, it should flow a lot more easier than some of the ones have, where it's just like questions, trying to make sure that, our guests are being heard and being seen, because that's what I like to do. At the core of all of this, I try to feature others to uplift them and to show the things that they do within our community. And who knows, maybe down the line somewhere, someone could hear one of these, see one of our videos, and be inspired. Because when it comes to spirituality, no matter what form of spirituality you prescribe yourself to, we each have our own experiences that led us to that journey. And sometimes people want to share those journeys and sometimes people don't. Sometimes it's not as bad as you think it would be. And sometimes, those coming out stories of spirituality can be heartening at times. And over the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of good feedback when it comes into people's own personal spiritual path and the acceptance of that path. But what's the flip side of that? And that's part of what my story talks about, is the flip side of, being able to be true to yourself and be scrutinized for being yourself. So that's what we're going to be doing today, is learning a little bit about me, learning a little bit about my path. And hopefully, if you feel like you're in a situation where you can't be true to who you are spiritually, then maybe I can help offer some guidance. So when it comes to tell a little bit about myself, in simplest terms, I've been in a pagan spirituality for 21 years. And it's progressed over time. And so has the gifts that I've been given, the knowledge that I've obtained, and how I present myself, going from someone who was fearful of telling others to being someone that pushes himself out to the forefront to speak for those who have lost their voice or feel like they don't have a voice. So when it comes to how does my path differ from what I was raised in, I was raised Pentecostal. So if you have no idea of what Pentecostal is, it is a Christianized faith. It is a belief that, your hair must be long, never to be cut. It is the belief that you've got to wear dresses and you've got to be modest. In the spiritual aspects, holding the snake and not to be bitten means that you are pure of heart. When it comes to other things such as speaking in tongues, There are many different spiritual paths that have that angel light, so to speak, speech, or that tongue that is not formal to what we would assume as a language. So, I was set up from the get-go to kind of have that spiritual awakening, so to speak, as it's been called. Now, when it comes to like what got me into the path I think it started out like everybody else. You learn about witch trials and you see things in movies and film, and you start to wonder about your own spirituality. And for me, that started right around when I was 12 years old. I lived in what would be considered part of the Appalachian Mountains, because I did live in Manchester, Ohio at the time. I wasn't born there. I was actually born in Middletown, but by the time that I remember growing up, I had always lived in Manchester, which nowadays it's a former shell of itself, and the community has kind of crumbled, so to speak, because I always go back there every so many years to kind of get back to that land. They always say that, there's always a place that speaks to you. That's your home. And my home is there. That's what I always knew. That's even when I was trying to escape from that place, I didn't know that I'd be drawn back to it as much as I have been, down the road as I've grown. But exactly how did it start? Like I said, I got introduced by learning about the witch trials, and then one thing led to another, and it was the age of dial-up, and I just started researching things. And the Greek pantheon always spoke to me, even when I was a little, you know what I mean, or small as a child. Just growing up with the stories of Hercules and all those mythos. So like it was something I was familiar with. So I started looking more into the Greek pantheon, and at that point I was looking for someone to work with, because everything that I had read up until that point was, the great goddess or the god. And it's more of a Wiccan concept, I know, but, limited reading in a small town and limited resources in the 90s when it came to different forms of spirituality and such. So as I started to look for who it is that I wanted to work with, I came across the goddess Hecate, which I'll go into a lot more later. But there was a lot of similarities and a lot of things that I would say made sense as I got older, of the things that I seen when I was younger, you know what I mean? And I've been with her on this path the same amount of time that I've been into the pagan path. I think I started working with her 6 months after I started really diving into paganism and what exactly it was. So she's kind of been my keeper, so to speak, during my journey. When it comes to like what path I would consider that I walk in my spirituality, I am very Hellenistic to the core, but I do work with other spiritual faiths that have magical tradition. Over the last couple years, I've gained a few things, a few different deities that I work with. Odin, Loki, Hades I've started working with. Athena I work with occasionally here and there. And, there's many more. Like there's some Aztec gods I've worked with in the past. Some other gods that deal with death, and different spirits that deal with death. Because death has been one of my things, our spirit work, I should say, when it comes to my path and how I practice. So, working with spirits, working with that darker energy, and finding the balance in between. I always say with my own spiritual path that I do not favor one over the other. I kind of have a path of neutrality. I'm not too dark, but I'm not too light. I'm somewhere in between because there's got to be balance in between both of them. It's like the yin and the yang. You can't have one without the other. And the void of one leads to an imbalance of the other. So, that's kind of how I've always worked my spiritual path. And the more that I started working with Hecate and the many folds and the many faces of Hecate, her path for many seems like just dark all the time. But for me, it's a balance of those energies. Because if you look at how she works, you look at the things that she does, the things she's been associated with over time, she is a balance between those energies, just like the mother would be. She is the balance between the young and the old, At least that's how I see it when I think of the three faces. If you go with the doctrine of, maiden, mother, crone, the mother is the balance in between the maiden and the crone. Not yet wise enough to be the crone, but not yet naive enough to be considered a maiden, which is the phase of life that I'm currently in. I always say I don't know everything, but what I do know, I know. And that's one of the reasons why here on the Devine Witch, no matter if it's on a podcast or a video, I always say no two witches witch alike. Because even though paths can be similar, the personality and the personal aspects of it can vary from person to person on what they perceive to be the path, what they reconstruct within their own path, and what they feel is right for them. And that's one of the reasons why I did so many videos before I did this introduction, just to show the differences in these paths, the similarities, the difference in the practitioners, because it's a wave of thought and spirituality coming into one. Now, like I said, I dived into the different gods that I've worked with. There are more. I've worked with Lu. I've worked with darker entities from the Goetia. I don't know why I said it like that. I guess it was like, ooh, make it tremble a little bit, poetic. I've worked with a few angelic spirits as well, elementals. I love working with elementals, but one must always be safe when working with elementals because things can happen, and I've seen it happen, and I've had things happen. Which, if you don't know what elementals are what falls in line to each of the directions. So north is associated with nature, so that would be your nature spirits or nature elementals, and so forth and so on. And those are fun to work with, but also you got to realize you can't work with elementals inside of your home. In my personal belief, like I said, personal practice. Just for the reason being, some of the elementals can be very forceful when you start to work with them, and it can be devastating to your home. So that's my word of advice. If you ever plan to work with any elemental spirit, be choosy and be wise when you're doing so. Now, when it comes to, working with different spirits, I've done quite a number of videos on it. I've wrote articles about it on my blog. Working with spirits, or what I generalize as spirits. So whether it be human, non-human, elementals, so forth and so on. When you're working in that broad spectrum of a term, it depends on who you're working with. Looking into traditions, if there is any, or if it's something new or something that you are creating to work with, because creating of spirits is a thing, which is based off of the energy that you put into it. Which, with me, I do a lot of my workings with energy magic. It's one of the things I've always been able to do, to draw in, to take away, to manipulate, to manifest. It's one of the things that I'm surprised not a lot of people talk about, because it's one of the easiest, but also the most complicated in terms of energy magic, depending on what level of energy magic you do. And the reason why I say level is because a beginning level was learning how to read energy, learning how to sense the energy around you, being able to manipulate your energy and your mood. And then as you progress onward, I would say the next stage would be able to change the energy within an environment, to be able not to only sense the energy around you, but also to pinpoint in which direction it's going to, and being able to follow that. It's also being able to sense energy from not just one location within a home, but finding out where it's at. Or, like, one of the best energy exercises that I've seen done over the years is where they would take participants out to the woods and gather all their car keys. And then one, normally the priest, the priestess, the shaman, would take those keys and place them all over the forest and would tell the participants, use your energy, find your keys. Whether it takes you 5 minutes to 8 hours, like using that energy to find what you need to find, and the urgency of needing to find it, but being able to calm yourself enough to find that energy. And I think the last stage when it comes to energy is being able to basically manipulate the energy around you, taking manifestation to a whole new level, to where not only you're just putting it out there and you're hoping for it, but you're actually making it come to life. And that takes a lot more energy and a lot more focus than most people realize. Because simple manifestations, such as birthday wishes, for example, it's a wish that is a manifestation of caution to the wind. In your mind, you're like, it may happen, it may not. But when you're doing this type of energy, so it requires more energy. Now, energy magic is something that I can go more into depth, but just as a simple little blurb about it, that's my personal belief on it. And I think this is a good time to say, I have family, I have kids, I have animals. So there may be at some point during this podcast, you may hear them. I try my best when I do these podcasts to do them later in the evening, but since I've got a wedding to attend later, I'm trying to get this done so that way it will actually be uploaded. So I do apologize if my voice changes a little bit during this and you hear any other things in the background. It's just life, you know what I mean? Can't stop life from happening. And I am definitely the definition of that. And it kind of brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, because it's one thing that I've asked everybody that's came through, for the most part, is the struggles that they face within their own spirituality or their own spiritual path. And for some, they feel like they're in a good place. They don't have anything more to learn. For some, they feel like, they do have their struggles, but it's not something that's detrimental to their spiritual path. For me, one of the biggest struggles within the path that I've chosen is to find balance for myself in between all the things that I do, because I don't only run the Devine Witch. I have a business as well. I have kids. I have, friends, and trying to find the balance of that in my spiritual path sometimes becomes an overwhelming task. And, I've put myself in such a way to where I make myself available to others. And sometimes it doesn't allow me to process the things that I need to process. And that's more of a spiritual and physical sense than it is just spiritual path. But it all ties in together. Because the mind, the body, and the spirit all work as one. When one system fails, the other system fails. Or there's imbalances within the system. And that's been proved. If you look at different aspects of recovery, the mind is very powerful. It can heal itself, some believe. When it comes to having a spiritual path, It can help you beat addictions. It can help you have faith that things are going to be better than what they may appear to be. And I feel like that's kind of where my path is with me. That even some of the mundane things that I deal with, I go to my spiritual path for guidance. Because for me, it's not only, well, I do witchy shit on the weekends or the full moon. For me, it's more in depth. It's a way of life. It's the way I think. It's, bringing the science aspect into it of rationality and like, can it be explained versus can it not be explained, by scientific means? And if not, then what do I need to look at? So that's kind of the balance of the struggle that I face in my own path. And then when you have other people who are not in the path you're in, you sometimes get labeled as the witchy friend, which is not a bad thing. But it does become daunting when, you get asked repetitive questions that you've answered before, but have soon been forgotten because the mind gets rid of things that it doesn't feel that it needs to have at the moment. So that's kind of where it is for me. That, and when it comes to working with Hecate, everybody says, life itself has its own crossroads, but so does the friendships and the connections that you make. And sometimes those connections will remain at several crossroads in your life. And sometimes, you get a good spirit come in. And when I say spirit, I mean human spirit as far as physical. And you have this connection with that, but that connection is not the same. You know what I mean? It's like a soul that's looking for a spot, but hasn't quite found it yet. And that's the hard thing when it comes to working in the path with Hecate, is the connections with people may not always be there for your continuous journey. They may only be there for a certain snippet at a time. And then you get into certain things like, what did you do wrong and things like that. And that's more of the human aspect, the emotional aspect coming into it. And eventually you learn it's not what you've done, it's just where they're going. So if you ever have that same issue and you enjoy the transparency, then yeah. And that's one of the things that with mental health is why it's so prominent for me, because I have people in my family I've watched deal with their mental health due to either abuse or circumstance, or just not being born in the right body and the chemicals being unbalanced. And for me, when it comes to mental health, one of the things that I deal with is depression. Sometimes it can be mild depression, sometimes it can be deep depression. It just depends on where I'm at in my mental headspace, obviously. And, surrounding factors such as the environment and things like that. So like when it comes to mental health and it comes to spirituality, what are the balances between the two? And that's a reason why I loved having Meg on, because it was almost like bringing the things that we don't talk about when it comes to mental health and, the pagan path, and like looking for those resources of help. Because over my years and even within my own struggles, finding someone that you can talk to that has that openness to know, okay, this is my spiritual path. This is what I follow. What is it? Is it me, or is it spirituality, or is it, something that I need to go get checked medically? And, over the years, many people have said, people in the pagan path have mental issues, but realistically, I think we can all agree that everybody is a little fucked up in their own little ways, just some are better at hiding it. And, we let this slide for so long, and there's still a stigma to talking about mental health and the pagan spirituality aspect, that it gets lost in the sands of time. And, that's why it's important to me, because when I go through my struggles, I'm very transparent. Like, I'm like, hey, this is what's going on. This is what I'm doing. This is what's not working. This is my thought process. It's just how I've always been, because I want to be that person that's like, you know what? I'm vulnerable. I have issues, and how do I deal with it while maintaining my spirituality? And I think that's what draws people into this group, because we are open, we accept many different people, and we try to be friendly and transparent as much as we can. When it comes into the pagan community, like, how do you get started in it, or how did you come into it? Like, for half of my practice, I was never in the public pagan community. It was one of those things where, like, I didn't feel the need to. I kind of just wanted to be in my own little bubble, doing my own little thing. Because when you bring in community, then you feel like you have to be on a certain set of, rules, even though for many there is no rules, unless you follow a Wiccan creed or have some moral guidance. But that societal norm, you know what I mean? It would just be like, even being back in the day, it was normal to sacrifice an animal. Today, not so much, depending on your path, depending on where you live and things like that. But it is something that has happened. It's just like the act of hunting. Many people in the mountains or in the country, they go hunting for their food. So that ritual is still there in some aspects, but it's not like, okay, I did this because I'm trying to appease a god. It's like, I did this because I'm feeding my family, and I gave an offering to, the land or whatever it may be. And that's kind of how, I see that with the pagan community. When you start getting into the pagan community, you are giving an offering of yourself, whether it's good, whether it's bad, everything in between. And when I wanted to get into the pagan community, I didn't want to have to drive far. As being someone with one car and somebody who's got a husband that, works nonstop, and I do my things here at the house with kids and homeschooling, I wanted to have something that I could do locally. And find the community that I knew was here in Middletown, but I didn't really see much of a push for different events around us. So that's kind of how the Devine Witch started, just kind of getting together, seeing what's out there, having fun. And, it's a little bit of naiveness, especially if you've never done anything, planning events or thinking about safety or any of that. Like, over the time, we've grown from either mistakes or things that have happened along the way. And, that's just part of it. You start to learn, you start to grow, you start to get bigger, you start to get better, you start to recognize things that you should do and you shouldn't do. And then you take a look at the broader community, you know what I mean? Like, you're not going to have an event on the same day that there's a big event going somewhere else that has been there for 30 plus years. You know what I mean? Like, that's a courtesy to those who are putting on that event. And it's also, it's not worth your time. Because which one are you going to go to? You're going to go to a little event that maybe a couple people will be there, or are you going to go to the big event that everybody's been talking about for the last decade? It's just resources and reality. So that's pretty much how I got into the pagan community. I started my little group and started doing things, and other people started hearing about it, and people started coming. And, I knew some people who had groups already established and would do things. And, I learned from them. I learned from the community what they wanted. And that's kind of how we started, and also how I got into the community. Because when I started the Devine Witch, it was probably like a year or so after I had I lost my mom, I lost my brother. They both passed away. I had a lot of changes in my life. I moved twice within a couple of years, and I was still trying to figure out who I was. So it was like trying to find community, trying to find myself within that community, and trying to find my place within the world. So I think that's how we all kind of start out as, you know what I mean? Even if you start a group because you feel like there's no other groups that do what you do and you want to see it and you know there's other people like you. And, you know, you started on a whim and then eventually it grows into something, whether it be growing online or growing in person or a little bit of in between. And that's what also got us started when we started doing Witch in the Woods. Like Witch in the Woods was the first big event I put together. The ideal was just camping in the woods, having some fun, having a ritual and, you know, all that fun stuff and a feast. And, you know, the first one, I think we had like 30 people. And, you know, I didn't consider signal in the woods is not always that great. And I didn't print out the ritual. And it was just one of those on the fly, barely put together kind of things. And it went off good. I had fun and, you know, learned, you know, saving trees helps, but sometimes technology doesn't work the way we want. And we have to continue to stay in the old school with paper and pen. And I've learned that lesson ever since then. Always have a backup plan for your backup plan for your backup plan. And this past Witch in the Woods, we went from, you know, the first Witch in the Woods where we had probably about 30 people to us having 80 people all together. Probably about half of them actually camped. So we had about 40 people or so on the actual campsites, and like watching something grow. And you've been there through the struggles, you've been there through the ups and downs, you've been there when, you know, it was small one year and big the next. It's just amazing to watch. And it's one of those moments where like you step out of your body a little bit and go, wow, we did that. And that's pretty awesome. And like, that's what I love about Witch in the Woods, because you can get together, you can camp. There's not really much, you know, push or shove to things. You know, we've added vendors over the year, presentations, just as different forms of entertainment for those who decide to come. And it's grown. Like this year we had an opening ritual, the first year that we've ever had an opening ritual, and it was done beautifully, you know what I mean? But by the end of the day, I couldn't even do my ritual because I was so tired. So moderation and trying to figure out where my energy should go. That is going to definitely be my lesson learned from this past year to follow me into the next. And hopefully the community will open their arms and help out the squirrel, which is what I identify as, mostly because of my ADHD, but also because I can do 30 things at once and still get distracted by something shiny. So if you have an animal that you associate yourself with, no matter what anybody says, enjoy it, embrace it. It's who you are. That's what I do. And it's helped me this far, and I found my fellow squirrels within my community. And, you know, I do a lot of social media. It's in spurts, but most of my focus goes to the Facebook page, and it goes to YouTube, and now this podcast. We do have others such as, you know, TikTok. I do a video occasionally here and there on there. And we do have a Twitter. I need to actually start using it more from what I've been told. But, you know, that's the thing too, like when it comes to doing the social media aspect, and we do also have an Instagram, by the way, the social media aspect of what someone who's never done it coming in and expecting versus what actually is, it's two different things. Because like when I first started doing this, I thought I need to saturate everywhere. We're going to get so many people from this, so many people from that. And realistically, over time, I started realizing what medias worked for us, what medias didn't work for us, and finding the balance in between. Because realistically, our demographic at this point is anywhere between mid-20s to all the way up to your 70s. We actually had somebody who was 70 come to an event and he looked like ageless, but that was beside the point. So, there's a different range of people and things. And like, as we grow, the media team will expand and, we'll be able to do a lot more frequently. But if you're wanting to keep up with things, YouTube, this podcast and, our website and stuff, that's pretty much where you need to stay. Like I said, don't really do much on Twitter. Don't really do a whole lot on the TikTok. Instagram, I will update like different events that we're going to be at and things like that. But it's just finding balance in between what works and what doesn't. And, with the website, we put up our videos, we put up blogs. A lot of the things that I write about are things that I've had conversations about within our community, or things that I've seen that I'm like, this is fucked up. And that's just me being real and transparent. Like, some of the things that you come across in any community makes you go, why isn't anybody talking about this? Why is it something that is being accepted? And, I give my 2 cents, whether or not people want to hear it, that's up to them. You have the choice to go for your information where you want to go. But if I'm going to come out into a community and I'm going to say, hey, I'm doing all this, then I need to be able to have my own moral compass guide me. And that's how I do everything. Like, if something needs to be brought up, I bring it up. If I feel like something's not right, or that I need to talk about, or maybe some new form of magic or some ideals of thought come into my mind, and I go to look, like, has other people experienced this, and if they have or if they haven't, I still share those experiences, because those experiences are my experiences. And it's just like with pagan authors. There's a lot of different ones. Some take you on a mental journey. Some are more cut and dry, like, this is how it is. Some are brutal in their approach, but you feel like they're being more real with you. And the same thing goes with this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like, some people like different podcasts, some people don't. I've heard many people say over the years, YouTube witches annoy the shit out of me, which I can get it. It's not for everybody, but you still got to think that there's also somebody that has their spiritual path, and part of their path may have called them to do what you're talking about them about. Some of them may just be doing it because they feel like that's what the thing is nowadays. It's the same with like shops. Some shops just do it because there's a profit margin. Some do it because that's what they love. That's what they've always been around. And they want to share that knowledge. They want to share, bringing people into the community and helping them while helping themselves. And that's why I always say, go with your gut instinct. Go with how you feel. If something doesn't feel right, you don't have to stay there. You don't have to continue to go back there. And you don't even have to talk crap about it. You can just feel like, it wasn't for me. It wasn't what I was looking for. And it's not what I needed. And I think that's one thing that, sometimes gets lost between personal opinions and egos and things in our community. Like, it's always a constant battle, but there's always a middle ground. The devil's in the details, so to speak. And I think that's how any community, and sometimes even here in Ohio, our pagan community is like that. We each have our own personality. We each have our ways of thought, our ways of doing things. And just because they're different doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means that the way we approach our spiritual path is different. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this podcast and you enjoyed hearing me just talking nice and not sitting here rattling off a bunch of questions, just having a conversation. And I think that's where it starts. Having conversations, no matter if you're in the Ohio pagan community, in your own pagan community, or just having a discussion with your coven. It all starts somewhere. We all have dreams. We all have hopes. We all have fears. We can work together or we can work against each other. But in my opinion, it works better when you work together. And with that, I mean, over time, you'll see what is true and what is not. And that's the path of spirituality for me. So with that being said, as always, remember to be yourself, to enjoy your path. And if you guys feel like you want to reach out to me, you can always reach out to me through email at thedivinewitch@gmail.com. It's all lowercase. You can reach out to me on Facebook. You can reach out to me on YouTube, whatever your heart desires. I can't say I'm going to be able to answer all your questions, but I'll answer what I could or can. And we'll go from there. And with that being said, always remember, no two witches, witch alike.